So yeah, intentionally provocative question, but he said he's letting you go first to answer this question. But is it the right move to be open?
Well, yeah, ladies before gentlemen on this one.
or really, it's more like you're trying to purposely answer second, which I understand.
This is the Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein. Featuring special guests, Vernon Verona Sherrill, Superintendent, Martha Group, and Clinton Athletic Director, Michael King.
What has the experience recently been like where we find ourselves here late August in a situation where we're trying to reopen schools? Schools have the go-ahead to reopen. Sports, of course, are following after that decision, but there still seems to be a lot of decisions and meetings that are needing to be happening right now. So what's the experience like at the moment?
I think that probably the main experience is one of being in uncharted waters, and that it's we're navigating our way through reopening in a circumstance where people are having a new experience, but at the same time, it's one that is fraught with concern over health and safety. And so as people are trying to move forward, on the one hand, I think that we're finding there's a certain level of excitement or anticipation for maybe what was known in the past, because I think people are really missing that. They're missing what school was like before. And there's a lot of apprehension about health and safety, in addition to not knowing what the experience is going to be like for teachers and children and families as they go into the school buildings in the fall. So I guess the best way to describe it is really one of unease and apprehension, and almost a sense of loss for what was, and a hunger for what was, but a realization that that isn't going to be the way that it is. So I think that part of it is helping people to feel as comfortable as we can with something that they've never experienced before, and knowing that we're having to do this together. So doing it in a collaborative way is important with our community. And being available to answer questions in an honest way, because we don't know what it's going to be like. We do know that we live in a region where the infection rate is low, and so that is helpful, but it's also a virus that's a really scary thing. And so people really want to keep their kids safe. So as they're making decisions, I think oftentimes we have parents, educators who are trying to make the right decision, are hoping that the decisions that they're making are thoughtful and the correct decisions, but also knowing that there is no crystal ball. So we have to really take that step into the unknown, which is in many ways an act of courage.
I would agree 100% with everything she just said. There's a lot of nervous energy, I think, out there. We are all creatures of habit, and this time of year, everybody's anticipating school shopping, getting back to sports, athletics, starting up a week or so before school, finding out who your teacher is, especially for elementary age, and just the excitement of the new year and the new start. And there's so many questions that we still don't have answers to right now. As you said, it's taking kind of a leap of faith. We try to communicate as best we can. The superintendent here in Clinton, Dr. Grimm, he's had a number of town meetings online, taking questions and trying to answer, but it seems like every question we get, there's always a question that builds upon that. So you're able to come up with an answer, but then there's something new that you're always coming across that now you got to try to anticipate what's going to happen and so forth. And we just don't know right now what's going to happen. You know, as you said, our numbers are very low in our area, thankfully. But, you know, I watch, especially with athletics, I watch the colleges locally. Hamilton right here and the NESCAC, they've shut down fall sports. They're not going to do anything until January 1. You see, you know, the bigger schools and so forth starting to close down. And then the ones that are attempting to do fall sports, like UNC this week and Notre Dame and so forth, they're now testing or having some test positive, and they're shutting down practices. And those are the large universities. So for us, you know, we're kind of waiting in the athletic arena. The rumor is that Governor Cuomo will be speaking sometime here within the next week in terms of athletics. And we're just anticipating and hoping, you know, for positive news in terms of trying to go forward. But again, if we get that, we don't even know what that's going to look like for sure. I'm sure Ms. Group could say in terms of like school, you know, we're talking about lockers in the high school and how kids are not going to be using them. And we're trying to keep them moving through the hallways. And well, then this leads to how about locker rooms for athletic practices? And if we do move forward with sports, where are kids going to change? And they're going to have to come dressed, and equipment's going to have to be taken home every night. And well, if they're taking it home every night, are we going to be able to sanitize the equipment, say for football, for example, if they're taking their stuff home? And so it just leads to question after question. We are part of the CFC conference. We met this past week, Wednesday morning as a group. We did a live meeting, obviously socially distanced, but we were in a live meeting. We met last week via Zoom. We are in constant communication, and we're all in the same boat. We're just waiting to see what's going to happen, and we don't know really. It's hard for parents, especially, who are trying to make plans for the fall.
Yeah. So one thing that Nate and I have spoken about a lot over the past few weeks is this kind of decision tree, is how we phrased it, of just kind of how decisions need to be made. And it comes from the State Department of Health and State Department of Education, Governor's office. Then it gets to, you know, the schools reopening. Then it's going to get to athletics. Then it's all these other questions, like you said, question after question about things that, as far as athletics is concerned, might not even have to do with the games themselves. It might be about transportation or testing, or, you know,
absolutely.
High school athletics are tied to education is one of the big points that Carissa Niehoff, the executive director of the NFHS, told us earlier last month. But I guess we could approach this conversation from that order. And again, I should say that the more that you two talk as our guests and the less Nate and I have to talk, the better, because people want to hear from you more than they want to hear us. They've heard enough from us already. But I guess starting with the school side, because right now the governor's office has requested that every school district have at least 3 meetings with parents. So from that school side, Ms. Group, what are your priorities for these meetings? What kind of things will be discussed? What messages are you trying to get across to your community?
Well, generally speaking, what we're trying to get across is to be able to provide clarity and paint a picture of what school will look like at different levels, whether it's pre-K through 6 or middle school or high school, so that parents can see what the day in the life of a child will be. That's something that we've been doing right along. And I know my colleagues, including Dr. Grimm from Clinton, have been having virtual town halls, virtual faculty meetings, virtual building principals have been having virtual meetings. So the first part of that, before the governor made his decision, was to be able to listen to our community and see what some of their concerns might be. And at the same time, doing a lot of research on what other states were doing with reopening, what other countries have done in reopening following pandemics, for example, like Ebola. So in our country, we didn't have the kind of horrific experience with Ebola that other countries did. We haven't had to close schools due to famine or due to war, at least not in our lifetime. And so what we tried to do is gather information from other places so that we could start to plan based on infection rates, based on social distancing, based on things that we were getting from the CDC. So as we gathered that information, that was a way for us to get information out to our community. So I think the first part of that from the very beginning when schools closed was to maintain that connection and the contact with our communities so that we didn't just leave them hanging. The schools are very much a part of the community, but a lot of what happens is kids are coming into the school or they're coming onto the campus or they're participating in athletics or the arts or extracurricular activities. And so there's a lot of coming to the school, and it put us in a situation where we really needed to reach out and get communication out into our communities so that our families had information. The spring lent itself to that because there are so many activities that happen in the spring that people were worried about, like graduation and award ceremonies and final, what might be happening with athletics, with championship contests, those types of things. But it really forced us to make sure that we kept connections going, and we were able to use that as a way to celebrate the positive things that happen in schools at the end of the year. And then we needed to make sure that we maintained, as I said, those connections throughout the summer without making people feel like they were overwhelmed. So finding that balance between maintaining the connection and not having them feel like they didn't get a break, because people are used to the summer break. So you want to make sure that they get that break, but at the same time, you don't want to leave them hanging. So I don't know if that really captures kind of what you were after.
No, definitely. It's the interesting perspective of, I mean, all these factors that are at play as you try and have these meetings. It's almost, there's so much, how do you even address all of it in the 1 or 2 or 3 meetings?
Yeah.
I know one thing that other superintendents or assistant superintendents have told me is that they're getting a lot of questions from the families and the parents. Overall, what would you say is the biggest question or concern that parents have been bringing to your attention or your staff's attention, and what have you or your staff been doing to kind of address that or figure it out in this time where there are just so many questions overall? What's the biggest one?
The biggest one probably has to do with what I would call health and safety. How are we addressing making sure that the schools are clean and sanitized, and how are we making sure that kids are that their desks are clean, but they're maintaining social distancing? What are the questions around wearing face coverings? How often or for what length of time do they have to wear them? When would they be able to take them off? What would that look like? So I think some of it, again, is still trying to get that picture of what school will be like. But most of it has to do with health and safety, which makes sense. I think that's really where you have to start, is with health and safety. And if people aren't feeling safe, then it's going to be hard to learn. So I think those seem to be the questions that are most prevalent in people's minds around how does it work if kids are moving from class to class? How are you keeping the desks clean? What happens if someone is ill? Wanting to know what would everybody be contacted in the school or in the district if someone contracts COVID? How would they find out? Those types of details. So it really gets ground down into those really fine details as people start thinking through the day. But essentially, it's mostly around health and safety, and we have a plan in place. We have to be consistent with that, and if they bring something to us that we haven't thought of, we need to be honest about that and make an adjustment.
And I guess my final question of my opening sequence here that I kind of have been thinking about is, for you, Mike, as an athletic director, I know also from speaking to other athletic directors across Herkimer and Oneida counties and Otsego counties that athletics is not really part of these conversations for these meetings that school districts are having, just because the NYSPHSAA purposefully delayed the start of fall sports 1 month from what would have been Monday the 24th to September 21st to allow for schools to have these meetings and see what reopening looks like before they have to figure that out. But what kind of position does that put you in right now as an athletic director trying to figure things out when really there's almost this month gap where it's literally you're being told you're not supposed to figure things out yet?
Yeah. As you just mentioned, we would have been starting this Monday, the 24th. And so we've started something last year where on the evening before the fall season or the winter season, we would have an orientation, sports orientation. We would gather parents and the coaches, and we would have a large, 30-minute meeting in the auditorium, and then they could break up and talk to their individual teams. And so the coach could have their parent meeting right off the bat. And so that's, what we've kind of been preparing for all summer, thinking that hopefully we would have that. And in mid-July, they told us we're going to push it back 4 weeks. We're kind of in a holding pattern right now. In essence, in education, oftentimes you like this group mentioned, you see what other people are doing. So, I'm taking notes on how we're in essence opening up school or how we're going to open up school. And I'm going to have to be applying a lot of that to practices and so forth. We talk about temperatures being taken of all the students. Well, that's something that the coaches are probably going to have to do prior to practices. They're going to have to go through that checklist of questions to be asked on a daily basis prior to starting a practice. And so I'm watching how Clinton's putting together their plan, and I'll be implementing that in essence and how we're going to hopefully open up sports. As you said, though, they pushed it back 4 weeks to September 21st. We've seen all the local colleges I mentioned kind of close down, Utica, Hamilton. I think there's a lot of people in the athletic arena that don't have the most positive feeling in terms of we're going to have sports this fall. I think most of us feel like it's something that's going to get pushed back to maybe January. We're preparing, though. We're hoping, I'm hoping maybe at least, the more non-contact sports like a tennis or maybe they decide to move golf to the fall for the CSC, for example, or, cross country. Maybe we could do something with the kids, but maybe a football or a soccer, which is obviously more contact and there's more concern of spread. Maybe that is something that gets pushed back to the spring, but it's a wait and see. And it's, for somebody who likes to plan, and I was a teacher for 22 years and we're kind of creatures of habit. Sunday night should be our orientation and Monday should be our first practice. And then we got 2 weeks and then we get into the season. And right now you're just kind of in a holding pattern, waiting. And it becomes a little anxious, I think, for all of us, wondering what it's going to look like. And parents do have questions and community members have questions. And unfortunately, you have to be honest and say, I don't know right now. Oftentimes, we will have to wait and see. And we've kind of done that since the spring, kind of just waited and waited. And people are getting I think they're getting a little anxious in regards to that too. They don't necessarily want to hear, I'm not sure how it's going to look yet. And they know it's 4 weeks away. Yeah,
I think on one level, people know that there are a lot of things we can't answer, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating. And it seems like every part of life that we're going through right now, we have to go through this phase of of wanting it to be normal, not being normal, wanting to know when it will be normal again, and then having to make that adjustment. So the adjustment for in the summer of perhaps not being able to go on vacation, or having to cancel trips with family, or not being able to go to the store, not being able to go to a restaurant, all the things that people do in their daily lives, they've had to either stop doing or they've had to modify in some way. And the opening of school is no different than that. So I think we just need to appreciate that that's kind of the social emotional state that everybody's in. And I think that we've had a lot of questions. I'm sure Clinton has 2 other districts about when are athletics going to start? Are kids going to be able to be in clubs? And what about the musical? And what about orchestra and band and all the other things that kids enjoy and our communities really enjoy being a part of? So it's just kind of another disappointment. So that's another thing we need to manage, is this never-ending stream of disappointments or adjustments that people have to make in every single aspect of their lives.
One thing that I often think about is this. I have a son who will be a senior. I have a son who will be a freshman. I have a daughter who's a junior in college. And for us here in Clinton, obviously, it's kind of one of those adages when you'd go to a school and the teacher would tell us how, great your child is in school and wonderful. And then you kind of joke and laugh and it's like, oh, you should live with her. It's kind of the same adage a little bit. There's so much frustration, with schools and colleges, and a lot of our parents have college age kids, but they're maybe not going back. They're at home still. They should be going back, jobs and so forth. There had been some loss of jobs. There's just all this frustration, and they're comfortable enough to come down to school. And you kind of get that a little bit where, yes, they want answers. Yes, they know they can't have them, but they're so frustrated with other aspects of their life that they're kind of comfortable enough coming to the school, which is the hub of the community. It is the center of the community. And, they vent a little bit, and you got to take that into consideration too. I mean, I don't think it's personal at all. I think like Ms. Grew said, they completely understand that in some cases our hands are tied. We're just waiting for information to come down. But at the same time, they just got to vent to someone. And so we're getting a lot of those questions repeatedly about, what we're going to do in the classroom and the distancing and the movement in and out of school. And like she said, if you're sick, which room do they go to, and how are we going to be contacted, and so on and so forth. And we're working on all those details, and then you find an answer to one, and then they come up with another question, which is legitimate and fantastic. And you go back to the drawing board and you work on an answer for that one. So it'll probably be moving parts all the way up till September 8th right now.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for both of you, and it kind of stems from talking to athletic directors and principals and superintendents in my neck of the woods. But how has your job changed? And since March until now, that I'm always curious talking. I don't think the communities realize how much you guys are going to bat for them and trying to make these plans, and you have a never-ending stream of questions that are impossible to answer. So I'm just curious, like almost on a personal level, how your jobs have changed and how you've been able to stay strong and keep fighting and just doing the best you can for the kids on a daily basis. And Michael, I guess we could start with you.
Yeah, this group, her job is much larger than mine, I have to say. So I'll be the short answer here. It's been difficult. Obviously, March 13th, they sent us home. Never expected that from that point on we wouldn't be back in school. The spring season got canceled. We moved into the summer, but again, you're anticipating that you are going to have fall and winter, and so you are continually work. I went into the office pretty near every day throughout that time period. There was actually fewer people at school than there was here at home, with the kids being home and everything. So I'd go in daily. We were working on schedules. We were, preparing in terms of ordering equipment and things of that nature. One of the things that has popped up on, our athletic radar is that there is an anticipation that next year's school budget is not going to be very good. It's going to be a difficult year. And so I'm looking into what can we maybe get ordered ahead of time? What can we stock up a little bit on to spend a little bit more now? Because next year's budget, my budget might be cut somewhat in terms of spending and so forth. So we're going into that. I was spending a lot of time here in Clinton organizing and just taking a very, inventory of everything that we have within the athletic department and hopefully preparing, like I said, for an opening. Now, of course, it's been kicked back 4 weeks. I don't know what the fall is going to bring. I don't know exactly what I'll do in school. I know they approached my secretary the other day saying, hey, we might need more help in the mornings as kids are coming in off the bus to do temperature checks and just to collect the surveys that parents are supposed to do in terms of the questions. I could be doing something along those lines, helping out there too. I could see that happening, just to help out wherever is needed this year, because it's going to be one of those years that you just don't know what's going to happen. So, like you said, you communicate with the other league members. We are trying to obviously advocate for sports and so forth, but at the same time, we got to keep the safety and the concern of the kids all in mind too. So communications with the executive director, Section 3, John Rathbun, and then the information that's come out of the COVID task force. And you try to share that with the community and so forth via emails or text messages that, this upcoming meeting has been postponed. It's been rescheduled for September 20th, for example, in my case. We'll continue to give you information as we receive it. We just, in the athletic arena, haven't received a lot of information yet to share, but I'm ready when it does come.
Yeah, it certainly has changed our lives and our work life. There's no question about it. Mike talked about communication with the different groups that he's affiliated with, trying to pay attention to all of those details. Some of what I think that people in my situation, or people as in superintendencies, have really had to focus a lot on both the present and the future. So as a superintendent, you're always looking forward. You're certainly paying attention to what's going on in the here and now, but we're always in taking that 30,000 foot view or that 50,000 foot view, because the teachers are taking care of the kids. We know the routines. If there's a crisis, then we certainly are really responsive and right there within a crisis, but most days are not a crisis. So we have faith that other people are doing the things that they need to do on a day-to-day basis. And then we put a lot of our energy into making sure everybody's on the same page, working with legislators, doing things around advocacy, planning for long-range planning for budgets, long-range planning for academic programs, looking ahead, taking into consideration things like enrollments and so forth. So we really pay a lot of attention to what I would call the big rocks. And as we get into the classrooms, the teachers are taking care of the kids day to day, whatever lessons they're working on, whatever projects they're working on. All of that got completely disrupted. And so as superintendents, we found ourselves having to work both in the present as well as thinking about the future and trying to stay ahead of it. So you could even chunk it along a continuum where there were the real details about what's happening with the kids, who's going to feed them, how many do we need to feed, who needs computers, how are we getting the hot spots. So I had set up a task force right before we closed. It was around March, I think 3rd, 4th, 5th, somewhere in there. And I only remember that because I was in Albany. There was a big superintendent's conference going on, and some of us had met with the acting commissioner and the chancellor, and it was like, okay, this is coming. It's in New York City. It's really bad. and we need to be thinking about the fact that we may have to close schools. And then in 2 weeks we were closed. But what we ended up doing was I brought in all my principals, assistant superintendents, athletic director, supervisors of transportation, food service, buildings and grounds, union presidents, and they were my team, so that I knew that I had people paying attention to all those details every single day. And because I couldn't do all that myself. So you're relying on people within your organization who are going to be looking at all of those details. And then the business administrator, how are we going to pay for it all? What do we need to buy? When do we need to buy it? So if we need to buy hotspots because we have kids who don't have access to the internet, finding out who they are, making sure that we get people connected to Spectrum if they're in a Spectrum service area, and so forth. So there's that immediate, those immediate things you need to be paying attention to, but then you don't know what the future is going to bring, because that time we were being closed in 2-week increments. And then folks are saying, do you think we'll go back? I don't know. Do you think we're going to open? So then you have to start to run these what if scenarios. What if we don't come back? What if we can't have graduation? What if, what are we going to do in the summer? What if we don't have summer school? So you start running those kinds of scenarios and think about the long range forecast for the pandemic, but then what do we need to do to plan for the future? And that's when I alluded to going back and looking at what happened in other countries with other epidemics and so forth. So you really are in a real crisis mode. It's not the kind of crisis like a fire, or an earthquake, but it's a crisis and it's ongoing. So you're functioning in that crisis mentality, even though, again, most people are fed, some people are losing their jobs. You know that your community is also in a crisis because you've got families that are trying to feed their kids, work remotely, teach, monitor their kids, competing for bandwidth in their house. So then you're going, each time you hear about something else or you become aware of it, then that's just another piece of the crisis that you need to make sure that you are getting people on so that they can help the community manage through the crisis.
And thank you for bringing all of that up too, because that's exactly the perspective that we wanted to add today, which is all of those decisions that are being thought about constantly and have been this whole time, that, just off the top of my head, I couldn't even have listed all of those off. Obviously you're focusing on them, but I'm sure there's that and more that's good for people to understand, kind of all these different aspects that have to come together. It just seems like it's a lot. Meanwhile, I know that this also seems like it's a lesson in how to organize a team from all these perspectives. You gather all the experts, you're leading the team, looking at that vision. I do some leadership training with high schoolers, so I always appreciate hearing those lessons too, and seeing how it's really put together in a situation like this. I'm going to ask a question, but just a reminder that this meeting's going to end in 4 minutes, so I probably will email you just another quick link so that we could close out in the second call, I guess. I will have to just jump back on. But for both of you, when you have all this that you're thinking about, and, I've been hearing all the different perspectives from parents, like some, for example, for athletics, some say, oh, we're in a good area, let's just get back on the field and go. We'll wear masks, we're fine. Then some say, well, we can't test how much virus maybe is spreading, so we don't want to risk it. And those are like two opposite poles. And you have two opposite sides and everyone in the middle. with all valid reasons on both sides, that you were just trying to weigh that scale, really, is what it seems to me from what everyone's saying, the coaches, the students, the parents, athletic directors, superintendents. How do you balance that while also focusing on making the decisions in all of these things? Just what is the process and what does it take to do that on a daily basis here for like 5 months in a row at this point?
Yeah, it's really hard because, basically, whatever decision you end up making, that there's probably going to be somebody who does not like it. And there'll be more than somebody. There'll be a group of people that will not like it. But you got to keep in mind that as you're making these, you're doing what you feel and what the group that you're working with feels is the best for the kids in our case. That'll keep them safe. Obviously, our main goal is to get them back into school, that socialization that is needed, and obviously the education, because that's the purpose of going to school in the first place. And yes, sports is a huge proponent and an addition and a way of putting, education lessons into the real world in a sense. You're working with other people and you're working together as a team, and things you talk about in a classroom you can implement on a field. And for sports, for a lot of kids, it's the reason some of them come to school. So you want to try to get that back on the table to offer that for them also. But it's going to be hard to do all of this. As you mentioned, I think Ms. Group mentioned, face mask wearing. There's some that say the kids should wear it all day long. Yes, they can take it off when they eat their lunch, but otherwise they should be wearing their mask. And then there's others who are like, well, my child can't do that, for various reasons. And well, if the desks are 6 feet apart, isn't that social distancing? So couldn't they take their mask off while they're sitting at their desk? And you're going to make a decision eventually that, one way or the other, and one of those two groups are going to be upset with you, but you're doing what you think is best for the kids. And that's what we're trying to do here. And I'm sure that's what every school is trying to do, what they feel is best for the kids. And yes, the parents, some of them are not going to necessarily like it, but hopefully they understand that you are, and they trust you, that you're doing what you think is good for the community, for the kids.
Yeah, I think Mike raised a really good point when he was talking about how sometimes people are just frustrated and they need to come in and vent. And that's the emotional side of it. So when you're making the decision, you're making the decision with the best information that you have and at the time. And so you may need to make a different decision later because the information changes. And then you're honest about that. But I think face masks are a perfect example of that. Early on, they weren't encouraging face masks. Now they are. They have different information. So we make a different decision based on that information. And so I think that what's really important is to go back to what is important to your community and what kinds of actual facts do you have in the moment that you can then utilize to make those decisions and do it in a thoughtful and measured way.
This meeting,
as you mentioned, information we get is always changing too. So as you said, you make a decision and then a week later you find out there's something new, and then people accuse you of, being wishy-washy or changing, but it really isn't that at all. It's just you've gotten new information because the goalposts seem to have moved a lot in the last 6 months.
Yeah. If you're an athletic director, you want to take care of your coaches. If you're a principal, you want to take care of your teachers. If you're a superintendent, you want to take care of folks. And so there's this balance between making sure that everybody is taken care of, because if you don't take care of the big people, then they can't take care of the little people, or if you don't take care of the adults, then it's harder for them to take care of the kids. Yeah. And so we would have situations where teachers were working because parents were working different hours. They were trying to be so accommodating to parents. I had a teacher who was getting like 3 hours of sleep because she had parents who were able to finally get on a Google Meet or an email at 11 o'clock at night or 11:30, and then there were others that couldn't get on until 4:30 in the morning. So you're like, wait a second. We need to set some parameters here. We need to make sure that people are going to be able to function, because if they don't take care of themselves, then they're not going to be good for anybody, and they're going to get sick. So let's make sure we put some structure to that. So it's one thing to do that for 2 weeks, but you can't do that for 3 months. You can't do that until we find a vaccine. We do need to make sure that we have structures and routines, and those are new, and we have to develop new ones for folks.
Yeah. Well, we left off just a second ago talking about just how many considerations there are in balancing all these different ideas and facts and getting guidance from experts, whether it's within your own district or whether it's, you know, on the state level or the national level or the section level. I do want to kind of midway through here ask a intentionally provocative question that I think maybe has been on people's minds as we go about all of this. And again, from your roles as kind of administration, we've spoken with coaches, we've spoken with student athletes and everything, but from administrative roles where we're kind of in that moment now where it's the administration that's coming up with the plans here. So my intentionally provocative question is it the right move to be opening schools right now? With all of this that is being considered and all the discussion points, and here we are on August 22nd as we're recording today, is it the right move to be trying to open schools in a few weeks?
I'll let Mrs. Group handle this one first.
Oh, it says you froze though, but it says my internet's unstable.
Did you hear the question?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, intentionally provocative question, but he said he's letting you go first to answer this question, but is it the right move to be opening?
Well, yeah, ladies before gentlemen on this one.
or really it's more like you're trying to purposely answer second, which I understand. This is why I ask the questions. I'm not the one who has to answer them.
It is a tough question. It is a tough question because, again, we kind of look at everything going around us, and you're seeing that the colleges are going back. And obviously this week we saw Syracuse University has suspended kids because they're not abiding by the social distancing rules that they've set up. You know, you're seeing that schools, as I mentioned earlier, like UNC and Notre Dame. UNC has decided to send them home for the semester. I mean, these are big universities, big public schools. Notre Dame, is doing the same thing. I saw this week Ithaca has decided to just have online for the first semester. And I was speaking to one of our athletic directors in our league has, I believe it was their son who goes there. And he said, the plan looked good that they had implemented of bringing them back slowly. And then all of a sudden they decided, nope, we're not bringing them back at all. So you see all of that. And it's a great question. Is this the time to do it? And then you talk to other people who are saying, my children, they've got to get back to the socialization. They got to get back to a routine. They got to get back to some form of normalcy. And school is that, for all of us. I've been going to school since 1978, basically. And my year starts in September and ends in basically like August when the new year starts. January 1st isn't the beginning of the year. It's always September 1st is the beginning of the year. So for some, it's very important to just get them back, even if it is in our case, 2 days a week here in Clinton with the hybrid model that we're putting forward. But at least it's some form of resemblance to normalcy. But at the same time, we don't know what it's going to look like on October 1st. You don't know if, all of a sudden a child comes down with it and then you have to start, pulling back the reins and slowing things down again. But it's a tough question. You're going to make some very happy with the opening, and then if you decided not to do it at all, you're going to make others very upset with doing that. So again, you try to take into consideration. Ms. Group mentioned it. our staff has been working, buildings and grounds have been working all summer. They've got a plan in place on how they're going to, clean each room, and we've moved desks, and, the nurses have been thinking about how they're going to set up and where we're going to have the sick room, or if somebody comes down with a temperature, that other room, because it could be something totally different. So everybody is trying to think of everything, but of course there's probably going to be something that you don't think of until it actually occurs. So it's a very hard question, and I'm not going to give you an answer one way or the other. I think I worked my way around that one pretty well.
Snaps to that.
Yeah, there you go. And I'll let Ms. Group finish that off with that.
Well, it really is not black and white. It's not that black and white. There isn't a yes or no answer to that. It's more of taking into consideration, engaging a cost benefit, quite honestly. And do we want people to lose their lives because kids go back to school? Absolutely not. We never want that. Whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's something else, which that could happen and will happen. So I think we have to keep in mind, this is not the first time that society has had to deal with a pandemic. This may be our first time of having to deal with a pandemic. So we have to do the best we can to learn from the past, and then take the information that we have in front of us, apply it to what's important to us as a society, and then try to make a balanced and informed decision about how best we can move forward given the information that we have right now. So there are certain things that we know. We know that kids need an education. We know that we are in an area where the infection rate is low. We know there are certain health and safety protocols that we can put in place. We know how to deliver in-person instruction really well. We're not as good at remote instruction. So there's a trade-off there. So we do know that if most of our kids are going to do better in in-person instruction, because that's what everybody's familiar with. We know that we will get better at remote instruction, but we're not proficient at that yet because we're still learning how to do that and how to do that well, balancing it against in-person instruction. So we know that parents need childcare for younger children, whether it's through in school or through daycare centers, however that happens. We know that. We know that many kids do well in school because they have extracurricular activities. So when we make a decision to focus first on getting kids back into school for the academic portion of their day, and then move into after extracurriculars and athletics, that there are going to be some kids who are not going to be as engaged as they would have been if we were going to have athletics, if we would have extracurriculars. So that's an informed decision, but we also know that it's not to the benefit of all kids. They're not going to benefit as greatly, perhaps, as the kids who are very academically focused and they love school and they love learning in school. I think everybody loves learning. They just love learning in different ways. But those are decisions that we need to make in a thoughtful, measured way. And we need to be prepared that if we make a decision and it's not going well, to change direction. And as leaders, the buck stops with us. And so if for some reason there's either a breakdown in our processes and procedures, or things don't go as planned, then we have to own it and take responsibility for that, and then listen to The other members of continue to listen to the other members of our team so we can head off a crisis if it's starting to happen as quickly as possible. And then we can make a better decision moving forward. So if we have to pull back from the amount of in-person instruction we're having to more remote instruction based on something that's going on in one of our buildings, that's what we're going to have to do, and let people know why it is that we're doing it. So do I think it's the best? Do I think we should or shouldn't? I think we should make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of our communities and our society at large. Because it's not just about today, it's about the future as well. And we have to keep that in mind. So we live our lives moment by moment, day by day, week by week, and we make adjustments within that context, but we are in it for the long haul. Well, this is a lifelong journey. So we make adjustments along the way as best we can, and we know we're going to suffer some catastrophes, but we have to be open to learning from those things and making better decisions. And hopefully the next pandemic that comes around we'll be better prepared for.
Or we'll be able to hopefully avoid it in some way, but it is in this more globalized world.
That would work too. Or hopefully we're retired at least.
Yeah, if there were 100 years between the last one and this one, I look forward to being alive during the next one also, you know.
Yeah, there you
I
go.
can assure you that if I am alive 100 years from now, I will be in the Guinness Book of World Records. And if you're still working 100 years from now and I'm still alive, I invite you to get in touch with me. I'll be happy to talk with you if I'm able.
We'll do a reunion.
Yeah.
But I like what you said about learning, because really that really is great perspective for both of you, that this is all about learning. This is about school, it's about learning. And right now we have to be at our best learning skills ever, because the process of learning is gathering information, observing, gathering information, doing something, seeing what works and what doesn't work, and then revising your plan and adapting. And that is the learning process. And right now we are, you know, in our lifetimes all learning together about what this takes here in 2020 to manage this. And I think we can look back. I'm no history expert or no health expert, but we can look back at 1918, the last pandemic, and we clearly are a much more advanced society now than we were then to understand what's going on and to react to it. The fact that we think that there can be a vaccine within a year and a half, and the current standing record, according to the New York Times, is 4 years is the fastest for the mumps disease. That's how fast the vaccine was made. So we don't know what the actual timeline will be now, but they're expecting it to be much quicker. So it seems like we're just in that learning process, like you mentioned, and maybe metaphysically about the learning process itself of education. Nate, I feel like I ask a billion questions in a row because I just keep thinking of things. I wanted to open the door for you to jump in.
No, I like the path we're taking here. So I say keep going. I like this.
I guess, you know, and again, I always start by saying it's a conversation, then I just ask a million questions, but that's what I do. And then I comment, you know, but, you know, while we're making these decisions, I guess maybe this is more of an athletics kind of aimed question for you, Mike, but September 21st, you know, you had mentioned that you already think that maybe that will get delayed to the January plan, which is the shortened season, start in January with winter sports. Yep. It just gets me thinking, though, that, you know, the purpose is, and we are aiming for September 21st, we're aiming for school to start on time. And we're taking the advice of the experts, and there is obviously all of that. But is there enough time, seeing how much thought has to go into all these decisions that both of you have brought to light in this conversation? Is there enough time to figure that all out, to really do all of this and get back to everything we want to this fall at least?
Well, that was brought up on Wednesday's meeting when we were together. You know, obviously we'll come back on September 8th and we will see immediately how well our plan was in terms of opening up school. And from that point, we'd have about, 10 days, 12 days to get ready for sports and the athletic season opening up. Will there be enough time? Yeah, we'll make it happen. Obviously there might be some long days and weekends and so forth in that 12-day stretch. But if we are going to start on the 21st, we will be ready. We will have a plan in place. Is it going to be hard? Yes. It's going to take a lot of us working together and the coaches and so forth, because a lot's going to be put on their plate more than even before. Obviously they're there to coach, but now, they're going to have all this extra paperwork in essence that they're going to have to keep track of and so forth. And it's going to be harder than ever. But I know the coaches are anxious to get back to the practice fields and get back to the playing fields. And I know some of them have expressed some frustration throughout the summer because we're seeing youth organizations be allowed to participate. But yet at the same time, our high school coaches have been told not to work out with their players. One sport in particular, football, a lot of off-season workouts go into place long before they get to the field in August. And, our weight room has been shut down. Our fitness center has been shut down since March 13th. And I know they look out and they'll drive, through the community, and they'll see kids playing travel baseball. And they know that there's travel basketball teams heading to Pennsylvania and other areas of the country to go play because there's nothing here. But yet our coaches aren't able to go with them. So I know they're anxious to get started. They would like to get started. And I know they'll do whatever it takes to keep the kids safe, keep them protected, and yet at the same time give them that experience that, many of them are looking for, especially, I think of the seniors coming in. They lost their junior year, their spring season, they lost prom, they lost a lot of those things. And now the perspective as we start the season doesn't necessarily look rosy, but we're going to do everything we can to make this a year that hopefully they won't forget for all the positive reasons.
It sounds a lot to me like a lot of this in the background, even though it's not being said explicitly, but it's a lot of thinking about, like the moral responsibility that we all have to each other, of trying to balance we do want to give them the experiences of playing football and or prom or, senior days and everything, and that experience that, everyone's supposed to have with sports and your years in high school that you only get once. And then there's also the side of being responsible for everyone's health and not wanting, you give to one side of okay, we'll do this, but you don't want to be putting everyone's health at risk. That's always the top concern from everyone that I've spoken with. So it just seems like it's very complex kind of thinking that has to go on here.
Well, it is. I mean, and it was kind of nice to get together as a group of ADs this past week because you realize that everybody's in the same boat. That for whatever reason makes you feel a little bit better knowing that you're not the only one that's kind of dealing with this and thinking about this all the time. But it is hard because they said, well, okay, what if we do open on the 21st? What are we going to do in regards to spectators? Are we going to limit the number? How are we going to police that to keep the social distancing? We're all, at least it's outdoor season, so if it's a soccer field, we can, space out and you can still all hopefully come. But, what if we go into the winter season? Are we going to have to limit, like each player can have 2 spectators? And who's going to police that? And how are we going to ensure and visitor spectators and, home spectators, and how are we going to keep everything? There's all of this that goes into it because, like you said, we want to provide this great experience, but at the same time, we've got to provide for their safety. And so that might be your son or daughter is going to get to play, but you might not get to watch them. So I know many of us are now looking into live streaming events to try to at least maybe do it that way where, okay, grandma and grandpa who always came to their grandson's football game, well, at least they can hopefully sit home now and watch it on their computer or TV screen or however they have the technology hooked up. So at least they're there in spirit, but they can at least watch it on the screen. So there's all of those things going into it. And then, as you mentioned, the business administrator, you talk about, okay, how do we afford all these new technologies and how do we implement them, like you said, almost immediately or try to? And that is going to be probably the difficult part for us.
So, I mean, there's so many parts that go into the decisions, like we already said. I almost think in some ways I try and be an optimist that maybe there are opportunities here where that technology allows the family members who live in Florida for maybe
Right.
like
You
I
never saw before. Yeah.
never thought to see, or I try and maybe it's a fault, but I try and look for that optimistic perspective within the craziness as well.
Well, this will definitely change how we do business, I think, because as you said, there's going to be some positives, and it could be that technological piece where grandma and grandpa can go to Florida now in November and they can watch the whole basketball season and they can be safer and warmer down there, and they don't have to feel guilty about missing their granddaughter's basketball game or volleyball game. And there will be positives taken. It's just going to take time probably to find that silver lining.
And I know, Ms. Group, you and I have spoken early on multiple times about the different phases Vernon Verona Sherrill School District was going through with using technology, and how we got really thrown into this technology age, even though everything was increasing. Even since I graduated from high school just a few years ago, there's much more technology involved in the classroom learning. And this kind of has thrown us into a situation where learning abilities, maybe there are classes offered online, or you can use technology in different ways in the classroom in the future too, now that we've had to figure it out. But we've definitely been talking for a while. Again, really appreciate your time on a Saturday to be thinking about this, because I know that you're thinking about this probably 24/7, also every other day of the week. So to help share that perspective with the community, that's the whole goal here, is to really just connect the dots. You both as administration with the community that's asking the questions, and we're all trying to figure this out together. I guess my final question, and of course, Nate, if you have other ones, I know I just keep asking them away, but please do feel free to jump in. But my last one is just the main point of why we wanted to put this panel specifically together today is, from each of you, what is maybe the one takeaway that you want people in the community to know right now about this decision-making process, as it seems just there's so much swirling around? What is the main takeaway that you'd want them to know if they come away with one thing from our conversation today?
I think that what I'd like people to come away with in this situation and in every situation is that we want to work with them closely because we want our kids to be safe, and we're always trying to make the best decision that we can with the information that we have, and that we really care about our kids and their families and our teachers. These schools, as I said earlier in the program, are so much a part of our community. They really are an extension of our community. So I think I just want them to know that we're there with them, that this is a collaborative effort.
And I would agree 100% with her, that we're here, we're working to do what is best by the kids and the community. And hopefully we'll be able to work through this together, as you said, collaboratively. It takes a community, I guess, to raise a child, they'll say. So,
and we need to keep that conversation going. We've been having conversations since spring through the summer. We need to continue it into the fall, and I think it'll make us stronger.